Hand him over and the gold's yours." The man who said it didn't dismount. He didn't blink, and he didn't care that the river behind Ruth Acker was rising fast enough to take the crossing by dawn. He named a sum, more than her ferry made in a year. All she had to do was give up the stranger shivering in her barn. Ruth had buried a husband in that river and run the crossing alone ever since. She had never once been offered a price for another man's life, and she was the only soul on either bank who knew the hunted man had done nothing wrong. "Well," the man said. Rain ran off the brim of his hat in a steady rope. Behind him, 4 riders sat their horses in the dark, and the water roared, and the lantern on her porch threw a small warm circle that did not reach any of them. Ruth held the lantern higher and did not answer. Not yet, because the answer would cost her everything, whichever way she gave it. It had begun before dark, the way trouble always came to the crossing, from upriver, on the wind, ahead of the storm. Marlow Crossing was the only place a man could get over the stone fork for 40 miles in either direction. Above it, the river ran fast through a gorge no fool would try. Below it, the banks fell away into marsh and quicksand, and 100 ways to die quiet. So everyone who needed the other side came to Ruth, and paid Ruth, and forgot Ruth the moment their boots hit the far bank. She ran it alone. A cable ferry, a flat-bottomed scow strung on a rope thick as her wrist, a windlass she could work herself if she set her whole body to it. A cabin, a barn, a horse, a mean old dog. She had run it alone for 3 years. Since the spring, the river rose without warning and took Daniel Acker off the scow and gave him back to her 2 miles down. 3 days later, white and patient and gone. The town said she was a fool. A widow, alone on a dangerous river, too stubborn to sell, too poor to leave. She had heard them say it. She let them. A reputation for foolishness kept men at a distance, and distance was a kind of safety for a woman with no one. She was not lonely. She told herself that the way she checked the cable every morning, out of habit, and because the cost of not doing it was too high to think about. She knew the river the way you know a thing that has hurt you, its moods, its lies, the smell it got before it rose. That afternoon it had that smell, and the sky to the north had gone the color of a bruise, and Ruth had brought the scow in early and snubbed it tight and gone up to the cabin to wait the storm out. Then the dog started barking, and a man came stumbling down the bank in the last gray light, half drowned and out of road. He came on foot. That was the first thing wrong. No horse. A man without a horse on the frontier was a man who had lost one badly, or run one to death, or been thrown from one while someone shot at him. "I need to cross," he said. His teeth were going. He'd been in the river already, she could see that, the way the water still ran off him in sheets. "Please, tonight." Nobody crosses tonight. Ruth kept the doorframe between them and her hand on the old shotgun behind it. "Look at the water." He looked. The stone fork was up over its low bank already, brown and muscled and full of broken things, carrying a fence rail past them as they watched, end over end, like it weighed nothing. The man's shoulders dropped. "Then they'll take me here," he said. Not to her. To the river, almost. He had the flat, emptied voice of a man who had stopped expecting help and was only saying the truth out loud to have said it. "Who'll take you?" "Men." An hour back. Maybe less. He turned and looked up the dark road the way he'd come. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought it to your door." And he meant to go. He actually turned to walk back up the bank into the rain, toward the men hunting him, rather than stand at her cabin and make her trouble his. That was the second thing. Ruth had spent 3 years watching men come to her crossing. Guilty men did not walk back toward a posse to keep a stranger safe. Guilty men begged, or bargained, or tried to take the scow at gunpoint. This one was leaving. "Stop," she said. The word came out before she'd decided on it. "Get in the barn." Don't light anything. Don't make a sound." He looked at her like he'd forgotten the shape of kindness and was trying to remember it. "Why?" he said. "Because the river's not the only thing in this country that drowns people," Ruth said, "and I've buried enough." His name was Cole. That was all he gave her, and she didn't press. She brought him a blanket and the heel of the day's bread and what was left in the pot, because a man with his teeth going can't think, and she needed him able to think. He ate slow, even starving. He offered her the first of it before he took any himself, held the bowl back out to her, automatic, like a habit worn into him from someplace gentler than wherever he'd been. She shook her head. He ate. "You'll want to know what they say I did," he said, when the worst of the cold had left him. "I'll want to know what you did." A faint sound out of him, not quite a laugh. "Most folks don't draw the line between the two. I'm not most folks. Ask the town," he told her. He'd hired on for the season with a rancher named Webb, Asa Webb, who ran cattle up on the high range and was known, when Cole said the name, even to Ruth, because Webb had crossed her ferry more than once, a big, easy man who tipped his hat and overpaid and talked to her like she was a person. Cole had been with Webb the day Webb sold the herd and took the money in gold, and he'd been there 2 nights past, when a man named Harker came to Webb's camp with 3 others, and an argument about what the land was worth and who'd promised what. "Harker shot him," Cole said. "Webb, in the chest, over a deal Webb wouldn't take. Then Harker looked at me, the only other man standing, and I saw him decide, so I ran. I've been running since, and the story that's chasing me says I killed Asa Webb and took his gold." He looked at his empty hands. "I've got no gold. I've got no horse. I've got nothing but the wet I'm standing in. But Harker's got 4 men and a tin star he bought somewhere, and out here a star and a story are enough to hang a man with no people. It was a good story. It was the kind of story a guilty man would also tell." Ruth said nothing. She took the bowl and went out into the rain to check the cable, because she always checked the cable, and because she needed the river's noise around her to think. And standing there with the rope humming under her hand and the water climbing the bank inch by inch, Ruth Acker understood, cold and complete and all at once, that Cole was telling the truth, and that she was the only living soul who could know it for certain, because Asa Webb had crossed her ferry yesterday morning, alive, big and easy, tipping his hat, overpaying. He'd ridden up from the south at first light and paid his toll and asked after the weather, and she'd put him across herself and watched him take the north road toward the high range. Yesterday, 1 full day after the night Harker swore Cole had killed him and run. A dead man does not pay a toll. A murdered man does not cross a river the morning after his murder, ride north and turn up dead on Harker's range a day later unless someone killed him there. The story chasing Cole was not just a lie. It was a lie with a hole in it the exact size of 1 toll coin, dropped into Ruth Acker's palm at dawn. And she was the only one who had been standing at the river to catch it. She did not tell him. Not yet. Knowing a man was innocent and knowing what to do about it were 2 different rivers, and she had only crossed the first. She went back inside and found he'd been at work. The barn door had hung crooked for a month, dragging on its bottom hinge, and now it swung clean and shut true. He'd found her tools without asking, and set the hinge and said nothing about it. He was crouched by the stove feeding her mean old dog small bits of the bread she'd given him, his own supper, 1 piece at a time, and the dog, who hated everyone, including Ruth on her worst days, was leaning its gray head against his knee. "He bites," Ruth said. "He hasn't yet," Cole said. She stood watching the firelight a moment. "You don't have to earn your keep. You're not staying. Habit." He didn't look up. A man sits still too long, he starts thinking about what's behind him. Easier to find something that needs fixing. He scratched the dog's ear. There's always something that needs fixing. She made coffee because the night was going to be long, and there was no sense pretending either of them would sleep. He took the cup like the bowl before it, careful, grateful, and he looked around the small cabin the way people did who had not been inside a home in some time, not prying, just hungry for the look of one. His eyes stopped at the table. 2 chairs, one pushed in tight and dusted with disuse. He didn't ask. That was the thing about him she would think about later after all the rest of it. He looked at the empty chair and the single worn place at the table, and he understood something, and he didn't make her say it. "How long have you run it alone?" was all he asked. 3 years. That's a long time to haul that windlass by yourself. I manage. I don't doubt it. He turned the cup in his hands. I just said it was long. And Ruth, who had spent 3 years being managed around and talked over and called a fool by people who never once asked how she did it, found that a stranger noticing the weight of the thing, just noticing it, just saying out loud that it was heavy, undid something in her chest she'd kept tied off tight since the spring the river ran high. She didn't answer. She didn't trust her voice, too. But she refilled his cup without being asked, which was its own kind of answer, and he took it like he understood that too. The motor of it turned in her all evening, the same question, around and around. She had proof no court could hold and a star couldn't argue with. She had seen Webb alive, but she was a widow alone at a crossing, and Harker was a man with 4 guns and a tin badge and a story the country already believed. A woman's word against all that was a feather against a flood. She could send Cole back up the road into the dark and keep her crossing and her quiet and the small safe foolishness the town let her have. No one would ever know she'd chosen it. The river would rise, the posse would take him somewhere, and Ruth Acker would go on putting strangers across the stone fork until the day the water took her too. Or she could put a man across against a rising flood and stand in her own doorway and lie to 4 armed men, and there was no telling what that would cost. The cable, the cabin, the crossing Daniel had died for. Her own neck, maybe, alone out here where no one would come asking after a foolish widow for a long, long time. What was the price of a stranger's life, she asked herself. What was she willing to be bought for, or frightened into? She did not have an answer when the dog began to bark. They came down the bank in the last of the stormlight, 5 riders, and the lead man swung down off nothing and walked up to her porch like he already owned the boards. Harker. He had a soft, reasonable face, and a hard, reasonable voice, and a tin star pinned crooked to a coat too good for a lawman's pay. He took his hat off to her, which somehow was worse than if he hadn't. "Evening, ma'am. Sorry to trouble you in this weather." He said it like he was sorry. "We're after a man. Killer. Shot a good rancher named Webb 2 nights back. Robbed him. Ran. Tracked him to this crossing. You'd have seen him, wet, on foot, no horse." He smiled. "Foolish, coming to a river he can't cross." "Lot of foolish men come to my river," Ruth said. "This one'd have come tonight. Last hour or 2. Nobody crosses tonight. Look at the water." Harker looked at the water. It was a different river than it had been at dark. It had stopped being brown and started being black, and it had a sound now under the rain, a deep grinding sound, the sound it made when it was moving rock along the bottom. Ruth knew that sound. The last time she'd heard it, it had taken Daniel. "No," Harker agreed. "No, he couldn't cross that." He turned back to her, and the reasonable face had gone still around the eyes. "Which means he's here, on this side. At your crossing, ma'am, whether you asked for it or not. There's no one here but me and a mean dog." Harker studied her a moment. Then he reached into his coat and took out a saddlebag, heavy, and set it on her porch rail where the lantern could find it, and opened the flap so she could see the dull gold gleam inside. It was a great deal of money, More than the ferry made in a year. More, maybe, than the ferry would ever make. "Hand him over," Harker said, "and the gold's yours. Walk in your barn, point a finger, go back inside, and forget you ever saw any of us. That's all. A woman alone on a hard river, you could leave this place. Buy a house in town. Never haul that windlass another day in your life." He let her look at it. He was good at letting people look. "Everything's got a price out here, Mrs. Acker. I'm just asking yours." And there it was, laid open on her own porch rail in the lantern light. Asa Webb's gold, the very gold she was accused of nothing and Cole was accused of everything for. Harker had killed a man to take it, and now he was offering it to her to bury the last man who'd seen him do it. Ruth looked at the gold a long time. She let Harker think she was looking at it the way he wanted her to. She was looking at it because it was the proof. A man who'd robbed Webb of his gold doesn't get hunted by the man who has the gold. The lie was sitting open on her rail, and she was the only one who could see it for what it was. "That's a lot of money," she said. "It is. For one man." "He's worth it to me," Harker said, "off this earth and quiet," which was the truest thing he'd said, and he didn't even know it. In the barn, Cole had heard. She knew it the moment she stepped back inside. The door was open a crack and he was standing just within it, not hiding now, and his face had gone to a calm she recognized, because she'd worn it herself 3 years ago, standing on a bank watching the river decide her life for her. "Put me out," Cole said quietly. "Take the gold. Be quiet. Listen to me." He kept his voice low under the rain. "You owe me nothing. You don't know me. You've no reason to believe a word I've said, and every reason to take what that man's offering. He'll kill you if he thinks you're hiding me. He's done it before, to a better man than me, 2 nights ago, over money. Take the gold, point him at the barn, and live." He almost smiled. A person who keeps a crossing 40 miles from anywhere shouldn't die for a stranger. "Put me out." It was the second time that night he'd tried to walk back toward the men hunting him to keep her clear of it. And Ruth Acker, who had spent 3 years being told she was a fool for staying, decided in that moment exactly what kind of fool she was going to be. "No," she said. "Mrs. Acker, I saw Asa Webb yesterday morning." She said it fast and low. "Alive, right here. He crossed my ferry, paid my toll, took the North Road. 1 day after that man out there says you killed him. You couldn't have done it. I'm the only one who knows. And I am not," she said, and her voice didn't shake, which surprised her, "going to take money from a murderer to drown an honest man. I've had enough drowning." Cole stared at her like she'd handed him back something he'd given up for lost. "They'll come over that water as soon as it lets them," he said. "By morning. Maybe sooner." "Then we don't wait for morning," Ruth said. "We use the only thing out here that scares them more than they scare me." She looked toward the black, grinding river. "And the only thing I understand better than any man alive." She knew the river. That was the whole of her plan and the whole of her life. There was a window. There was always a window, even in a flood. A stretch of minutes when the current ran high but true, before the next surge came down out of the gorge and turned the whole channel into something no rope could hold. She had spent 3 years learning to read it. It was the same window she'd missed, once, the spring the river took Daniel, because she'd been a softer woman then and had hesitated. She would not hesitate now. She told Cole to stay low in the barn until she called. Then she went down to the scow. She let Harker see her go. Let him see the foolish widow checking her ferry in the storm, the way she always did, fussing over her rope like it mattered. He watched from the porch with his men, and he let her, because a woman fussing at a ferry no one could cross was no threat to anyone. She worked the snub line free. She felt the river through the cable, through her boots, through her teeth. the great cold weight of it, climbing, and then, for a moment, leveling, holding, the window. "Now," she said into the dark. "Now, Cole, run." He came down the bank fast and low, and was on the scow before Harker's men had their guns clear of their coats. Ruth was already on the windlass. She threw her whole body into it the way she'd taught herself to, and the scow swung out off the bank into the black water, and the river took the underside of it and shoved, and for a moment, one long terrible moment, she was 19 again, and Daniel was on the water, and the river was deciding. But she knew the window. She rode the current instead of fighting it, let it carry the scow downstream along the arc of the cable, hauling, hauling, the rope screaming on the windlass, the far bank coming up out of the rain. Cole leapt for it and made it, and turned, soaked and stunned and alive on the safe side of the stone fork. On her bank, Harker came off the porch roaring, "Bring it back! Bring that scow back, woman, or I swear." "Send your price across," Ruth shouted over the river. "I'll ferry your gold, I'll ferry your star. Come and pay the toll." He took the bait because men like Harker always believe the world is for sale, and they have only to find the figure. He sent his men down to the water's edge, 2 of them onto the lip of the bank, reaching for the cable to haul the scow back hand over hand, and Ruth Acker took her husband's axe off the windlass post, and with 3 flat hard strokes cut the cable. The rope went with a crack like a rifle and a long whip snap across the water, and the scow with Cole on the far side swung free and grounded safe in the slack downstream eddy where she'd aimed it. The near end lashed back, and Harker's men threw themselves flat to keep their heads. And the stone fork, freed of the rope that had spanned it for 30 years, surged up its banks in the dark. The next surge, right on the window's heel, the one she'd known was coming because she always knew, and put a churning, killing width of black water between the 2 banks that no horse and no man and no amount of gold could cross before the flood ran itself out, days from now. Harker stood on the wrong side of the river with his star and his story and his dead man's gold, and screamed himself hoarse at a widow he could not reach. One of his men, fool enough or scared enough, spurred his horse into the shallows to try the ford. The river took the horse's legs out from under it like Ruth had known it would. The man went under, came up, went under, and Ruth Acker, who had every reason on God's earth to let the stone fork have one of them, who had screamed at this same river for 3 years to give back what it took, ran down her bank and threw the coil of the snubbing line out across the black water with the same arm she'd hauled 10,000 strangers across with, and caught him, and dragged him choking and ruined back into the shallows of the only side he could reach. "I won't take your money," she said down at him while he coughed up half the river. "And I won't let it kill you either. I'm not the toll-taker you think I am." She looked up at Harker across the impossible water. "I keep a crossing. I decide who crosses. Tonight, none of you do." The marshal came 11 days later when the water had dropped, and he came from the right direction for once, from the south, from the territorial seat, on a tip that had traveled faster than Harker could ride to chase it. Because Cole had not run far. He'd gone to ground on the far bank, dried out, walked 3 days to the nearest telegraph, and sent word to a man Asa Webb had named in his will, a partner in the cattle sale who'd been waiting on Webb and his gold and had grown suspicious when neither came. That partner had a lawyer, and the lawyer had a marshal, and the marshal had questions that the dull gold in Harker's saddlebag answered all at once. Webb's herd money, marked, weighed, and recorded at the sale, sitting in the bag of the man who swore a dead drifter had stolen it, but it was Ruth's word that turned the key. The marshal rode out to Marlow Crossing because Cole told him to, because the only person who could place Asa Webb alive a full day after his supposed murder was a widow who ran a ferry 40 miles from anywhere and remembered every face that ever paid her toll. Ruth told it plain. The toll coin. The North Road. The hat tipped to a woman the town called a fool. A dead man does not pay to cross a river. The marshal wrote it all down, and for the first time in 3 years, a man with authority looked at Ruth Acker like her word was worth more than the gossip about her. He asked her, before he left, why she'd done it. Why a woman with everything to lose had cut a 30-year rope and stranded 5 armed men for a stranger she'd known 3 hours. Ruth thought about it. "Because I knew," she said. "Nobody else on this earth knew, and I did. And a thing you're the only one to know, you can't set it down. It just gets heavier till you do something with it." The marshal nodded like he'd heard truer testimony than most of what came across his desk under oath. Word got back to town, the way word does. Some of them had the grace to be ashamed. A few rode out to the crossing that fall with things they didn't owe her. A sack of meal, a pane of glass for the window that had been cracked 2 winters, a strong back to help rehang the cable. They didn't apologize, not in words. But they stopped calling her a fool, at least where she could hear it, and out here that was as close to an apology as the country knew how to make. Harker hanged at the territorial seat before the first frost. His 4 men scattered. The crossing went quiet again, the way it always did. Cole came back on a clear morning in the fall when the stone fork ran low and bright and harmless, the way it could fool you into forgetting what it was. Ruth saw him from the bank. He came up the south road on a borrowed horse, slow, like a man unsure of his welcome, and he stopped at the water's edge where the new cable hung. She'd strung it herself, with the marshal's 2 deputies hauling, the week after. And he looked across at her and didn't come on. "There's a toll," Ruth called over the river. "I haven't got much," Cole called back. "Everybody says that. Then they pay it anyway." He led the horse onto the new scow. She put him across herself the way she had Webb, the way she had 10,000 strangers, working the windlass with her whole body, while he stood quiet and watched her do a thing she was better at than any man alive. When the scow touched her bank, he stepped off, and he stood in front of her, hat in his hands, with the look of a man who had practiced what he meant to say on 3 days of road and lost all of it at the sight of her. "I came to pay what I owe you," he said. "You don't owe me. You put me across a flood. You cut a 30-year rope for a man you'd known 3 hours. You threw a line to a man who'd have let the river take you." He shook his head slowly. "Folks said you were a fool to stay out here alone." "I've heard." "They had it backwards," Cole said. "You're the least foolish person I ever met. You knew the one thing nobody else did, and you knew exactly what it was worth, and you wouldn't sell it for all the gold a murderer could carry." He turned the hat. "I haven't got a horse that's mine, or a dollar that's mine, or much of anything that's mine yet, but I know rivers some, and I know hard work, and I know how to stand by a thing once I've decided to. And I figured a crossing 40 miles from anywhere is a lot of windlass for 1 pair of hands." Ruth Acker looked at this quiet man who had twice tried to walk back into the dark to keep her clear of his trouble, and who had instead come back, in the clear light, to ask if he might stay in it with her. "It's a hard life," she said. "The river takes things. I won't pretend it doesn't." "I know what rivers take," Cole said. "I'd rather help you watch this one than stand on the far side of it again." She thought of the second chair at her table, empty for 3 years. She thought of the cable she hauled alone every dawn, out of habit, because the cost of not checking it was too high to think about. She thought that there were tolls worth taking after all, that some prices were the kind you were glad in the end to pay. "Put up your horse," she said. "There's stew on, and only 1 bowl's been touched." And Cole smiled, the first real one she'd seen on him, and went to put up the horse, and offered her the first of the stew before he took any himself. Automatic, a habit worn into him from someplace gentler, and this time Ruth Acker took it. Below them the stone fork ran low and bright and patient, the way it would until the next storm and the next rider and the next toll. But the windlass had 2 pairs of hands now, and whatever the river decided to take from her after this, it would have to take it from a woman who was no longer standing on the bank alone.